Right, so while the media and politicians across the world pore over the events of the so-called Flour Massacre in Northern Gaza, the legitimacy of the aid they were carrying coming into question, the lives lost there at the hands of the IDF. If aid can't get in there, the one thing that has succeeded in entering the Strip, weirdly enough, are illegal settlers. For so long, Israeli excuses of self-defence whilst flattening the Gaza Strip from north to south has had many commentators, myself included, suspecting Israel intended to take Gaza for itself. And certainly some of the more loudmouth elements of Netanyahu's government have voiced their loud support for the seizure of the Palestinian territory. Heck, there's even been a conference by the settler movement Nahala, with government figures as guests, where all the settlements to go in Gaza have been drawn up already, all of which I've covered in other content. But with settlers having been allowed into northern Gaza, or at least got away with getting into northern Gaza, where Palestinians have recently been killed, and indeed the IDF have shot any Gazans attempting to return north during last November's ceasefire, it looks more and more like this is very much the plan now.
חבר'ה מטורף, אנחנו בעזה, איזה כיף לנו, כולם הולכים לחזור לפה בקרוב, הולכים לחזור לגוש קטיף, הולכים לבנות כאן פי 4 ממה שיישובים שהיה כאן, פי 10, הכל יהיה שלנו, זה החורבות, לא יישאר מזה כלום, אנחנו כאן, אבא תודה, אבא אנחנו כאן, אבא איזה מטורף, אנחנו בעזה, בואו כולם אלינו, זה מטורף, כולם רוצים, גם החיילים שמפנים אותנו הם באמת רוצים להיות פה, הכל בסדר. כולם איתנו, חבר'ה מטורף.
Right, so what you saw there are settlers that broke through the northern Gaza crossing at Eretz, not really being stopped in any meaningful way from having done so. You saw some Israelis chatting quite happily to the soldiers there in the first bit of video. They've been stopped from entering Gaza, those ones. But the second bit there showed other settlers who had already broken through. Apparently some 100 odd of them managed to enter, and some stopped to build what was in their words a symbolic building, what amounts to the most significant attempt by settlers to try and enter Gaza to re-establish the settlements taken down in 2005. When Israel withdrew from its habitation of the Strip, they subsequently, of course, turned it into the world's largest concentration camp by whacking up massive walls all around it. Well, these walls didn't contain these 100 or so settlers who managed to get through, came in, and the 20 or so of them who were documented and shown there building that structure between the two walls that comprise that barrier around the Strip. It's a double wall. As the last bit of footage showed, though, not all of them chose to do that. Others sought to get much further into Gaza, cheering about re-establishing the old settlement of Gush Katif, that there will be 4 times the number of settlements, 10 times what came before, even as soldiers finally decided to lead them back out of Gaza. What a difference to the events of the Flour Massacre, laughing and joking as soldiers lead them out. Gazans, as we know, were gunned down instead. This incursion has been appallingly badly covered, but here's an excerpt from the left-wing Israeli magazine 972 Magazine, which gives a succinct summation. Over 100 Israelis stormed Eretz crossing at the northern tip of Gaza yesterday afternoon in the most significant attempt to re-establish Jewish settlements in the Strip since the war began. A small number managed to cross several hundred meters into Gaza before being intercepted by Israeli soldiers, while around 20 others entered the area between the two walls comprising the barrier that encases the Strip. There they established an outpost in the style seen commonly in the West Bank, building for several hours without the army or police interfering. From the first moments of the war, it was clear that right-wing Israeli politicians and settler leaders sensed an opportunity to radically shift the status quo in Israel and Palestine. For months, calls to resettle Gaza, often in the same breath as calling to expel the Strip's 2.3 million Palestinian residents, have been getting louder, not least at a major conference in Jerusalem in January, at which senior officials laid out their plans. In parallel, right-wing activists, mostly youth, have been coming regularly to the Gaza fence to demonstrate against the entry of humanitarian aid into the Strip. Yesterday's action, however, marked a new peak in their activities. At around 2 p.m, activists began gathering at a train station in the southern Israeli city of Sderot, close to Gaza. At that initial meeting point, for what was ostensibly a protest honouring Harel Sharavit, a settler who was killed while serving in Gaza, the mood was calm, even sleepy. A police car drove past, unmoved by the scene. From there, the activists drove in private cars toward the Eretz checkpoint, the only civilian crossing point between Israel and the Gaza Strip, which has been defined by the Israeli army as a closed military zone since it was briefly taken over by Palestinians amidst the Hamas-led October 7th attacks on southern Israel. One point of note that excerpt didn't mention, however, but which has come out subsequently, was that one of the invading Israelis there was apparently the son of Israel's Minister of Heritage. How ironic, not to mention perverse. Amihai Eliyahu, himself an extremist far-right politician, and of course a part of Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition government, coming from the hard-right Otzma Yehudit party, the party led by settler hero and Zionist loudmouth Itamar Ben-Gvir. Eliyahu is himself a settler. He lives in the West Bank. So presumably his son travelled specifically to Gaza to be part of this. And, well, Eliyahu is a real charmer. This is a guy who has supported the notion of nuking Gaza, whilst also being a proponent of settling it. You might find there's an issue with doing both of those things. He opposed the two-state solution. He's called for the execution of Palestinian prisoners and has attacked the IDF for being too soft on Palestinians. He also endorses the expulsion of Palestinians from their lands with no support, saying they can go to the desert or go to Ireland. He's not the first to say they can go to Ireland. Makes me wonder what Israelis actually think Ireland is actually like. And he also opposes humanitarian aid on the basis that they'd never give aid to the Nazis, so why should we give it to them? Again, we are reminded of the sort of people Netanyahu, himself already a madman, was prepared to do a deal with to get back into power. To my mind, this story casts further doubt on the matters surrounding the Flour Massacre, now Flour Massacres, since there's been a second one, near the Kuwait roundabout in Gaza City itself the day before yesterday. The last one was just to the south of Gaza City. No aid agency to date has admitted to having supplied the flour for Israel to deliver into the north of Gaza. We know there are people there still. We know they are desperate, clinging to some form of survival, been over a month since they've seen any aid. And this was the first aid delivery in all that time. But who did it come from? Because with no aid agency admitting to it, it does smack of a ruse to lure people out to be taken out, because that is certainly what ended up happening, isn't it? We've seen plenty of aid deliveries. They've never resulted in mass killing like this one did, or these ones now have done. I'm also reminded that during the ceasefire last November, people who attempted to return to their homes in the north of Gaza faced being shot, and indeed some were. I'm also minded to remember that Israeli forces have hampered aid deliveries to the north by actual legitimate agencies trying to do so, such as UNRWA, so they had ended up giving up trying to get into the north. And of course Israel have tried delegitimizing UNRWA to take them out of the equation too and render Gaza unsurvivable under Israeli occupation. Having not coughed up their so-called evidence for that, the EU have, as I spoke in a video about the other day, resumed funding to UNRWA. They've sent them 50 million euros. So it's no coincidence that Israel have now made more accusations against another 450 UNRWA workers now. And again, not producing any evidence to back it up. Clearly, they are determined and really hoping they have a chance to take that agency down. So as much as all of this, where it comes to settling Gaza, is circumstantial right now, a small incursion, 2 massacres of starving people, the lowest of the low, aid being blocked in the south by more settlers as well as to the north, more attacks on aid agencies, Israeli politicians gobbing off about settlements and attending settler conferences. Having shared my thoughts on all of this previously and here again now, thoughts that I don't think are at all conspiratorial, all things considered, I don't think it matters how many nations around the world are saying they won't tolerate Gaza being taken over by Israel, because it very much seems to me that that is exactly what is intended, and because none are still, to this day, stepping up properly and sanctioning Israel over what they've done so far, still supporting them in too many cases, why should Israel fear being stopped from seizing that land? In fact, the West are doing everything but sanction Israel. They're still protecting it. Certainly the US and the UK are. Our daft little defence secretary with a Napoleon complex wants more funding to keep on losing to the Houthis in the Red Sea, for instance. Watch this video recommendation here to find out all about British government idiocy on that score and not taking the hint they can't win there. and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.